Michael. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Ana, and I work with the Spanish Transition Hub, Red de Transición, and I'm also involved in permaculture, and I have studied and done research in regenerative sustainable agriculture. So we only have 15 minutes for the huge topic that this is, but let's see where we can get to, and then maybe go deeper with your questions and insights. So I'll just begin sharing my screen. Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, you can see that? Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna move this to the side. Okay. Great. So when we started thinking in NESI about, well, what are the topics that we need to cover? In the first forum 2 years ago, this was not one of the priorities for several reasons. Mainly because when we talk about innovation in the economic system, this is not what comes to our mind first, right? Maybe what comes to our mind is rather technology or organizational development, that kind of thing. However, we know that food, the management of food and all the cycle to actually get the food to you and so that you can consume it is at the core of every economy in the world. And therefore, I'm very happy that this year this is going to be one of the main tracks. When we were thinking, okay, but then when we talk about food, what can we talk about? Because of course we can talk about many things. And for me, it was particularly interesting that we settled on food sovereignty, because when you ask people what is food sovereignty, what do I understand by food sovereignty and why is it important, people normally tell you things like this: access to healthy, nutritious food, ideally, but mainly access to food, the management of food resources, ending hunger, access to land, control of the modes of production. And then if you're more into the permaculture, regenerative agriculture scene, then you could hear things such as regenerating the ecosystems that feed us. However, food sovereignty is not this. When we talk about these things, we are talking about food security. So this is what we need to feel safe in terms of our needs being met, in terms of food, in terms of nutrition. But when we talk about sovereignty, what we're actually talking about is decision making. We're talking about the capacity of a community or a group of people to define and decide upon their own agricultural and production policies. Now, why is this important? Because in the globalized economy that we live in, we don't know where these decisions are being made. As a consumer, how much capacity, how much freedom, how much scope could I hope to have to actually say, I am going to decide over what kind of food reaches my table, reaches the supermarket, reaches the market. In many ways, we have given up our sovereignty in terms of access to food and the quality of this food to big companies that bring the food from very far away, very often. And when there is no sovereignty, food is not treated as an essential need to the life of humans in this planet, but rather as another cargo that just gets transported from one place to another. So we need to when we talk about sovereignty, we are talking about bringing back the production, storage, distribution, and consumption of food to the center of the economy. At the moment, we know that the mainstream economic system, this neoliberal system, does not put food, or for that matter, people, at the center of its concerns. It puts money, it puts the making of profit. And when you put profit instead of food at the front of all your preoccupations, what happens is that you create a system of production like the one we have now. You will all be more or less familiar with this. So we have the producers that fish or farm or raise the food that we are going to produce, and whatever is not food or food for our food gets destroyed, dismantled, etc. Then we begin this really long way, in some cases of thousands of kilometers, of transportation, processing, distribution, packaging, and then selling. And in the case of this model, then goes to the restaurant where you actually get that food. And we have naturalized this model to such an extent that even questioning it sounds strange. If you tell a person, so we should change this, there is this lack of imagination. People often say to me, so then what are we going to do? If this model were to change, if we were to stop bringing the food from overseas, what are we going to eat? I need my pineapple in the morning, even if it comes from Costa Rica and I live in France. It's my doctor says so. I need it. I could not live without my pineapple, right? Or when we go to a restaurant, do we even stop to think where all of the food has come from? Do we question the people who work there? Do you know who your providers are? Do you know if how this has been produced? Do you know the impact this food has had? Do we care? And for me, that's the key of the question. Because if we don't care, there is no way we are going to be able to rethink the way the system works. So what is our system made of at the moment? Our current economy, in terms of food production, is based on just a few crops. In particular, wheat and corn. Wheat is more in Europe, and corn, as you probably know, is predominant in the US. And the fact that we have access to cheap, accessible oil that allows us to run all the machinery that produces the amount of corn that at the moment we have available. Now, why did we evolve? How come we evolved in this way, from hunting, gathering, to very diverse and rich agriculture and horticultural systems, to systems that mainly produce grain? Well, of course, we know that grain is relatively easy to produce, doesn't need irrigation, for example, and most importantly, it's easy or easier to store and transport than fresh produce, for example. In this case, we have begun producing so much grain that we have made everything else surrounding the agricultural system become reliant on grain, especially when it comes to raising cattle, for example. We are producing so much grain that we don't know what to do with it, and often entire harvests rot and go to waste because we just can't find people to buy it. We cannot eat more pasta, we cannot eat more bread, we cannot continue feeding our cattle the corn or the wheat that we are producing, because the cattle are not designed to eat this kind of product. They are designed to eat grass, and we are feeding them something that is making them sick. In addition to this, the way we are producing relies heavily on the mechanization of the production. And if you want to pass a big machine so that it allows you to harvest as much as you can in as little time as possible, the clear solution is, okay, then let's produce using monocultures. Let's just plant the same thing, hectare after hectare after hectare, year after year after year, and just make an easy profit out of it. Now, the consequences of this, as you may already also know, is soil degradation. This kind of agriculture does not respect the natural flow of resources within the ecosystems. we are investing more in machines than we are in people. So we have less and less and less people actually working as producers, and more working in the transformation of products. And of course, this system is so reliant on fossil fuels, is destroying ecosystem after ecosystem, that it's one of the main contributors to climate change. And this is something that we need to gain awareness of, because we take for granted an abundance of food, and an abundance of the availability and diversity of food, because we have these fossil fuels and these machines at our disposal. But tomorrow, this may not be the case. In fact, it will not be the case. And we have destroyed in great measure the capacity of the land to reproduce the cycles of fertility and to regenerate itself. One clear example is in the loss of biodiversity. So we could talk about other ecosystems, we could talk about other species, but in particular, if we just look at what the kind of things that we actually eat. So at the start of the 20th century, you can see the width of the line is the number of varieties of each species of vegetables. So you could say, well, beetroots or cabbages, oh my God, there were 408 species of tomato. Really? Of lettuce? 497? That's insane. Normally you go to a supermarket and how many do you have? 2, if you're lucky. How many cucumbers? How many types of corn? And this is not just that that these varieties are not adapting to climate change, for example. It's just that if you wanted to go to a place where they sell seeds and try to get hold of the seeds of any of these ancient varieties that we used to plant not that long ago, you cannot find them anymore. It is really difficult to find the varieties that, for one reason or another, the public does not want. For me, one really clear example is purple bananas. Have you ever seen a purple banana? Well, they exist. They exist. And the same with carrots. Do carrots always have to be orange? No. In fact, wild carrots are purple, which is amazing. Not just because it's my favorite color, but I just find it in the imagination that a purple carrot can open for us in terms of what is possible is amazing in comparison to the uniformity of orange carrots. They have to be orange, and if they're not orange, we will not buy them. So we need to understand the relationship between this limitation in the availability of diversity, of difference, and the way we see the world around us, and the opportunities or the responses, the creative responses we can give to the problems that arise. If what we eat is limited, if what we see around us is limited, it's the same thing, it's the same color, it's the same shape, what can we expect in terms of creativity when it comes to responding to great challenges? Oh, this is a question I can just leave with you and maybe come back to later. So, food. Okay, so we've talked about the agricultural system and how it relies on oil and other fossil fuels, machinery. We could also say that in most of the world, it is not big farmers, big corporations that feed humans. It is small family scale farms that feed us. Of course, that's not the case in Europe, and it's not the case in the US, for example, but everywhere else in the world, it's small farmers feeding us. So, how do we imagine the experience of food? Just consider for a second your favorite food. Just this food that you absolutely love, this dish that when they put it in front of you, you just know it has everything you need. You know that it's going to nourish you. And what is the feeling of anticipation, of seeing it, smelling it, even before you taste it, the experience of knowing that you're going to get what you need. For me, it looks something like this. It's like I see this, and for me, this is what every human should have access to. This variety, fresh, organic, good quality. I see it and I think, yes, probably this is not everything, but if this is the basic, these are the basics, then I'm happy. I know I can survive. Or if I'm feeling particularly romantic that day, I could also imagine this, to take it a step further and actually have the person producing the food bringing it to me in a way, having this direct contact with the person who has planted, grown, harvested the food, and having that human exchange, right? Where I'm not just receiving a good, right? I'm actually receiving the work and perseverance of this person. And that nourishes not just my body, but also other parts of myself, which are equally important. However, for most of us in Europe, I mean, I don't need to go very far, just here in Madrid, where I am at the moment, how is the experience of food for most people? It's something like this. And depending how you look at it, this is magic. The fact that we have been able in such a short period of time, really in 100 years or less, to get to this level of abundance, where you can go to one place and have everything you could ever want. And the impression, the illusion, because it is an illusion, that it's never ending. My grandmother, when she was young, she could have never imagined something like this would ever be possible. And look at all the colors. It's like a carnival. It's the paradise of any child. So much sugar. Yeah. However, what is the difference between the previous pictures and this one? What is the experience of food that we are offering people? Because here, when you go into a supermarket like this, what they are selling, more than the actual products, is the illusion of choice. It's the illusion that you are free, you have the freedom to choose whatever you want. But of course, I look around and I think, well, everything is packaged. Everything has tons of sugar, probably. Everything has chemicals in it. Most things will probably be produced or come from very far away. They will last forever, most things. So how free am I really when I get to a place like this? And who is deciding that this is okay? Who is deciding that this should be the normal way in which we should feed ourselves? There are people who go to supermarkets and only stay in these sections. They never go to the fresh produce section, and even less to the organic section. I mean, we can get to organic later. Just because it says organic on the label doesn't mean it actually is organic. But of course, the policies that help this kind of things proliferate are completely opposite to the kind of policies we would need for this to proliferate. They are entire opposites. And this brings us to another part of the production cycle, which is how do we deal with all the waste? Okay, so we know that industrial agriculture, the current model we have, greatly contributes to the land degradation, to climate change, to deforestation, the destruction of ecosystems, in the production and in the transportation. But then we cannot forget to talk about the waste. not just the waste from, for example, the farms where they raise cattle, which is already terrible in and of itself, but all the waste we are generating from buying in supermarkets. It's an amount of waste that we cannot possibly hope to manage properly. And even in a diagram like this that proposes a circular model, right? It says, okay, so we bring everything, all the products, we bring them here, and then there's a part we recycle, there's another part we use for heat and electricity. Maybe there's a little part that goes to the landfill, but it will be minimal. We are assuming that we will forever have the necessary resources to continue transforming oil and other raw materials into the products that we need to have all the packages and all the products that seemingly last forever. This is a lot of packaging to manage, and it will be used. All these packages will be emptied at some point, and all this plastic and other components will have to be managed at some point. And currently, we do not have the capacity to do it. In fact, one of the main things we need to take into account if we want to talk about food sovereignty and how the current system affects our existence in the planet is that we are assuming that these resources will be available forever. However, at the moment, we do not know where things are going to go. There are many indications. There is solid data that says that if we continue as we are going, the most likely scenario is that industrial societies are going to collapse. Not just because of people in Wall Street playing with our money and risking it and causing disastrous consequences to the world economy, but mainly because our food relies so heavily on having oil that if tomorrow this oil stopped being produced, and that's what's happening, there will be a chain effect leading us to this collapse. Already we can see in Spain and in other countries, the truck drivers complaining and striking because the oil prices are going up, the fuel prices are going up. People are starting to not being able to feed themselves because the price of food is going up. And that is just going to continue getting worse and worse. Of course, if you look at what the general culture says about, well, so what's going to happen? We know, of course, you go to the movies and everybody knows that we will invent something at some point that will make everything fine again and everything will be fixed. Or if not, then we will find some sort of stability using technology, because we know that technology is the solution to everything. However, the development of technology also relies very heavily on the availability of cheap fuel, in this case, oil. So one of the things that we need to think about seriously if we really aim for food sovereignty and food security is that we need to begin an energetic descent. So we need to begin creating and supporting existing systems that are much more sustainable and that do not require the degree of fuel that the current system needs. And this goes hand in hand with talking about policy. So right now, whenever a policy is made in the European Union, it is not analyzed, it is not considered from the point of view of agriculture, of farming, or of environmental regeneration or climate change. It is designed to continue helping the people who are making a profit out of this system to make even bigger profits. in this sense, it seems like the aim is to produce money instead of food, which should be worrying us. This is something that we take for granted, that the food will be there forever. But if it's not the food that is at the center, then what is it? And in many instances, the food that we consume is produced so far away, and there are circumstances that are probably even beyond our imagination. We never pay the real price for it. When we want food that is available, readily available, and as cheap as possible, and we continue demanding this lowering of prices, etc., who is paying the price? If it's not me, if it's not coming out of my pocket, who is paying for the environmental degradation? Who is paying for the low wages? Who is paying for this? Is this the kind of economy that we want? Now, of course, there are alternatives. And this is one of the things that we need to pay more attention to, because it always seems that because there's no one unified solution, that we are not doing anything to address the problem. But in the face of the problems of monoculture, what we need is polyculture. What we need is diversity. So one of the things that we need to focus on is regeneration. We need to help the ecosystems not just maintain themselves, but actually improve. We need to increase the surface area of forests, of meadows. We need to stop cutting down trees. And we need to understand how important it is in terms of climate change to sequester carbon through plants, essentially. And this carbon sequestration will also help us increase the fertility of soils, and hence the resilience of the ecosystems to respond and regenerate themselves in the face of catastrophes such as an increase of 2 degrees Celsius in the temperatures of the world. In fact, another thing that is rarely talked about is, in terms of the fertility of the soil, how the current system, agricultural system, relies so heavily on fertilizers, on industrial chemicals fertilizers, that we are running out of also. Phosphorus is also peaking at the moment, and people probably go like, phosphorus? Who cares about phosphorus? Then I would say, well, do you care about eating? Then you should be caring about phosphorus, because if there is no phosphorus, then plants cannot grow. At least they will not grow at the rate they are growing at now, which is what you need to be able to go to a supermarket and feel like you are never going to run out of food. So who is offering these alternatives? So of course we have agroecology. We have the transition movement, who tries to not just promote more sustainable production and consumption, but also talks about the relocalization of the economy. We have regenerative farming. We have permaculture as a design system for the creation of healthier and more resilient ecosystems. We have food cooperatives who try to reconnect the production of food with the consumption of food, and actually raise this awareness among citizens of the importance of being closer to the people that produce your food. We also have zero waste, the zero waste movement, for example, and we see also the proliferation of markets and supermarkets that refuse to use packaging to lower the environmental impact. And of course, there are many others. These are just some examples. So just to begin wrapping up, when we want to respond to this challenge, the challenge of food, the challenge of having access to healthy food and being able to decide, the change that needs to happen needs to be personal, and it needs to be voluntary at this point, because we still have some time before things like this become mandatory because of scarcity or drought or harvest failure. We still have the luxury to choose. So let's choose. Let's choose to reinforce, strengthen, and participate in community food systems, whereby we connect with farmers, we learn together about food, about how food is produced, where it comes from, and what it takes to produce it. Let's think about future generations. We will not be the last humans on this planet, and this is not just about humans anyway, and we need to think about them too. To support local food economies, this thing that I was talking about, the relocalization of the economies, let's create jobs locally. Let's support the people that we actually can be in touch with. Let's make those profits stay in the community instead of go away overseas to another country and benefit people that we will never meet. Let's make good quality food more available and affordable. Let's make organic local food the norm instead of the exception that only a few can afford. And get engaged. Essentially, one of the main things that we need to do is participate. We need to learn. If you have children around you and the school happens to begin a school garden, it's amazing how they can transform the views of their parents, the views of their family on the importance of producing our own food. So let's allow ourselves to be transformed by the need of a community around being able to choose what we eat, where it comes from, and how it affects the planet, and hopefully make that effect as positive as possible. And just to end, a quote that I really like from Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, which if you haven't read, I highly, highly recommend. Essentially, he says, look, if you're going to do anything to change your life, to change the way your existence affects the world, shake the hand that feeds you. Get in touch with the people who are producing the food that you need and give back to them. Support them in what they do. Encourage them, because really they are fighting against a monster and they need all the support they can get. Thank you.